Yeah, we've got TrackVia here today, and we are talking about using the old function. And let's go ahead and jump into a few housekeeping items before we get started here. Number one, everyone's joining in a listen-only mode, right? Just to help for the feedback on the webinar. If you have any questions or an interactive quiz we'll have here in just a moment, please use your chat window. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll share that out here after the meeting is finished, and then that usually comes in about 48 hours is how long it takes to develop it, and then us to edit any parts out that aren't necessary. All right, then hello, my name is Taylor Termentozzi. I'm our Director of Customer Success here at TrackVia. Got a little bit of bio here, but for the most part, I've been here for 6.5 years at TrackVia. I started in implementation, have gone through customer success and a few different management roles here. But I'm also helping out our dear friend, Derek Cutlass, who usually runs these webinars, and he's expecting his first child to be born any day now. So I'm covering for him, and Caroline, I'll let you say hello.
Hey everybody, I'm Caroline. I'm a part of the technical solutions team here at TrackVia. I'm an implementation engineer. I started off as support and then transitioned into this role. Little bio there, but I've been loving every second of it. This is my first webinar as well, so I'm very excited to get started here.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and take a peek at the agenda. So, right, we're talking about the old function today. There might be some of you who have used this before. We're going to do a little giveaway for today's webinar. So if you've ever used the old function before, and before I give you the examples and Caroline demos these examples, submit what your old function was used for in any of your applications and a little description about why you used it and how it was helpful. And after the webinar is over, we'll pick out a winner and we will send you a TrackVia t-shirt. So step number 2, using the old function. We're going to use examples of it. Then what needs to go into it, what sort of prerequisites exist or limitations. Caroline will show us that, like I said. Then we'll leave some time for questions and some takeaways and wrap-ups at the end. All right, so step 1 here. What is it? What is the old function? How come I've never heard of this? The example that we'll share here just in this screenshot, right? The history tab that you have inside of TrackVia, it shows you what fields were changed and what the values were changed from and changed to. The old function does a very similar thing to that. In the product name here, even though it's subtle, right? We changed the name of Jujitsu Gi lowercase to Jujitsu Gi uppercase, and right, that change needs to be recorded. It is by our logs, but maybe you want to have that be shown in your application for a number of reasons. And I think we have one little hidden feature here, Caroline. Yeah, perfect. So the syntax is to use old with the double curly braces here, all in capitals, in the field name that you're looking at. And if you're familiar with app scripts or have any formal training here, or you've used this for different functionality, it's really the exact same thing as the previous values in app scripts. Like I want to know what it started out as, and right, the history tab is for your admins only. So maybe a part of using this is exposing it to your end users. Okay, so these are examples that Caroline will show off today, so I won't go into them too far. But again, we want to see what the values, the status field was before it was changed. More commonly, we'll see this in, I want to see everything that's ever changed, and all of its history. So more than just a single, the last change. Maybe you want to calculate the total amount of different statuses that a record was in for a time, or freezing. It's another way of not allowing someone to change a particular field for certain times. And then how many times has this field been edited? As a purchase order, an invoice, we want to keep a count on how many edits occur to a single record. Okay, so with those examples, right, then comes the requirements. These can only be created, the old function can only be used inside of a triggered field, not a calculated field, obviously not a single line or anything else. You'll want to use a triggered field. And then obviously you'll want to be mindful of the type of data that you're using in that triggered field. Is it a date? Is it a text? Is it a currency? You can't use this, since it is a triggered field, it has limitations of its own outside of just the old function, but you can't reference a parent table's values or a child table's fields either. And you can't have triggered fields referencing other triggered fields, or that triggered field can't reference a calculated field and use this function. And a very common error is, right, it's double brackets. This is the only function that's like that. And it also, if you don't capitalize it, it doesn't work. And if it's a text field, it'll just say old with the double brackets around it, which obviously is not what you're looking for. All right, with those requirements and some examples here, Caroline's going to jump in and show us it actually working, so we're not just talking about it.
Sweet. Thank you, Taylor. I'm gonna exit out of this PowerPoint and open TrackVia. Hopefully everyone can still see okay, but feel free to put in the chat if you're having issues. But right here, I have a tasks table, right? So in this task table, I have different fields, kind of like the ones Taylor was mentioning, with different functions in each. And I'm gonna kind of go through each and showcase them on the form level as well. So to start, I just have a status drop-down list, and in this particular case, I'm just using a app build use case. And typically, you know, those go from A to B, B to C, but for the demonstration purposes, we're going to be able to go back from scoping to building and back to scoping if we need, just to kind of showcase the old function, right? So to start off pretty easy, we have the previous status triggered text field, which is just looking at the status and what it was previously, right? So on this form level, I have a previous status. The task name is just app build 1, and I have the status set to scoping. Save it, nothing happens, right? Status hasn't been changed. Now, if I want to change it to building or modifying, whatever, it's going to stamp in scoping here on the previous status, and that's going to change every single time the status is changed. So that's just kind of helps you keep in mind what it was before, if that's something you're looking for with your app, right? So it's pretty simple, straightforward. You're only using the old function in front of the status. There's nothing else there. And then we're going to move into the number of status changes. And this is a triggered number field that has an if statement. And we're going to kind of break this down before we go into the form, right? So what we're doing here is we're looking at the previous status and the current status. So if those don't equal each other, as in there has been a change in the status, we're going to take a look at the previous number of status changes. And if there hasn't been any, we're going to use the coalesce function to stamp in a 0 instead. And then we're going to add 1 to that with each status change. So if there's been multiple status changes, that's going to keep a running total of those status changes. And again, this is an if statement, right? So if there hasn't been a status change, as in that they equal each other, we're only just going to stamp in the previous number of status changes, which will be null. And I'll showcase that here on the number of status changes form. So I have the task name is app build 2 and the status is scoping. I'm going to change that over to building, and that should stamp a 1 here, right? So there's only one status change. And if I do this multiple times, it's just going to keep adding in those changes. So that is how to calculate the number of status changes using the triggered number field here. The next one I have is tracking if we want to know how many seconds a status has been in a certain, I guess, status, right? So right here, we're using another if statement. So if the previous status in this case is scoping, we're going to take a look at the updated date and time field in the previous time it was updated and calculate the difference in seconds. That's why we have this S here. And it doesn't obviously have to be seconds. You can use hours, minutes, whatever you want for your use case. Just for this purpose, we're using seconds. So if the old status was scoping and it's been changed to something else, we're going to take the difference of when it was previously updated to the current updated in seconds and add in any time that was calculated previously in while the status was scoping. So we're taking those seconds and adding them, and if the old status was not scoping, we're just going to stamp in whatever it was in that seconds in scoping previously. And we're using the coalesce function here again. So if there wasn't anything, it's just going to be 0. And that's the same for all of these triggered numbers here. So there's no difference. It's just a different status, but the same formula for each. And that is here, seconds in each status. So right now, if I have it in modifying and change it back to building and save it, it's going to calculate how many seconds I had it in scoping. And if I change it back over to, modifying again, it's going to calculate that, however many seconds it was in building previously. So this is super useful. Again, you don't have to use seconds. You can use hours, minutes, days even. Whatever is most useful for your use case, you're able to do that in the function part of in the table builder. And then we have status updates. So basically what we're doing here is same as a few of the others before. We're looking at the previous status and the current status, right? So if the previous status does not equal the current status, we're going to snip the last user field. And this means we're only going to take the first part of the last user field because this is the format of the last user field. And we don't want all of this in this status updates. We just want to use my first and last name. So that's why we're using the snip function here. So if the previous status doesn't equal the current status, we're snipping my first and last name up until the less than sign, adding in the text, change the status field from, and then we're adding in the previous status to the current status on the updated month, day, and year. And then here we have a line break, right? So we can have a running list of all of these status updates. So we won't only just see the one currently that has been changed. We're going to get a running list, and I'll showcase that in a minute. But if we have a previous status that does equal the current status, as in there hasn't been a change, we're just going to stamp in that previous status update. And I'll go ahead and move over to that form. Okay, so here is task name at build 4, the status scoping, and say I want to change that over to building and save. It's going to log that. Caroline changed the status from scoping to building on May 25th, 2022. And again, this is also very customizable. You can add whatever text you want here. And with that line break that I showed in the formula, it's going to keep adding those updates here. So you're going to have a running list, which is super useful. You don't have to. You can also just show what was there previously and nothing else. But for this case, I do have a running list here. So this is for status updates. And lastly, we have the date completed triggered text field. So basically what this is looking at is if the previous date completed trigger field is blank, we're going to check to see if the status is complete. And if the status is complete, we're going to mark the updated date and time and stamp that into this field. And if the status is not complete, we're just going to null it out. Now, if the previous date completed trigger field is not blank, remember this is an if statement, we're going to stamp that value into the date completed trigger field. So here, status is scoping, nothing's changing because it's not complete yet. Once I mark it as complete, it's going to stamp the date and time that it was completed. And I also threw in a calculated date field to kind of change the format a little bit. If you don't like how this looks, you can just change it over and take the date completed trigger and put it into this calculated date field here. I'm done. I don't see any questions, so I think I'll throw it back to you, Taylor.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There was a few of those old functions that I hadn't used actually. I'll admit that as soon as AppScripts came out, maybe like others on this call, when AppScripts came out, that kind of became my default for how to build really similar functionality out. But I think it's great to go back to the basics. Like maybe you don't have the time to learn your app scripts, or maybe you just don't care to introduce that new level of automation that's not like compiled and checked the way the table editor is that you use in app scripts. So yeah, if anyone has questions, I think I see a few coming in here, but yeah, if you have anything, please put them into the chat question, the chat field in the webinar. And I'll pause for just a moment. And while we pause for just a moment, I see a few examples for how the old function has been used. So we'll read through those after the webinar and find who's going to be the winner of a new t-shirt here. Let's go ahead and cover the takeaways then, please. Okay, so number one, right, it has to be in a triggered field everywhere that we showed this, right? It has to be used there. Like I said, if you're not comfortable with app scripts, or it's this table's too important and it can't ever break, I don't want to change a field name, I didn't use constants, right? This can be done fairly easily and fairly repeatable, and it's highly functioning, right? These triggered fields give your account performance improvements, or it doesn't have to calculate unless something truly has changed, right? You can save a lot of performance pains by creating well thought out triggered fields that do certain functions and only when you need them to run. And right, these are a few examples that we shared, and there are many more ways to use this, right? And can you take this old function on different tables, and can you use calculated fields to maybe compile that information from several different tables together? Or maybe when you're building views, right, you're looking at the number of times the line items have changed, the number of times the invoice has changed, and you're summarizing totals or times in these, right, with the goal of having some more metrics on improving hey, if we're editing invoices 30 times, maybe we need to have a little additional time before we send them out. Or why are there so many edits? Are these last minute changes? You can even use them for like checkboxes as well. When this checkbox has complete marked, right? We did a lot of drop downs, but with checkboxes, you can timestamp changes as well. That's generally helpful, especially like time it was received, and then if it changes in the future, not necessary. All right, just a few resources for the attendees today. Right, so we're going to put this recording back into TrackVia University. We'll be there for you to watch and distribute as you'd like to. If you have questions or you're running into issues using this, or you're trying to change the inputs, the outputs, whatever, feel free as always to call or email our support line. We love to talk to all of our customers, and it's the fastest way to get responses. So please feel free to call us up. And as always as well, right, if you have lots of needs for your application and you don't have the bandwidth or the know-how, we have different ways where you can use TrackVia's in-house services to build them out for you. One question from Ryan: are the 5 sample formulas, will they be available in the knowledge base or updated in email? Caroline, do you know if we put are those samples in our TrackVia help, or do you know if they'll be in the email that we follow up with?
I don't think they're in the knowledge base, but I think we can definitely put it in the email for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. We'll make sure that obviously the examples are shared, so they're reusable, and you can reference them in a a copy and paste format, so you don't have to come up with them all by yourself. Yeah, and then I think there's 2 more items here. So we have another webinar coming up on July 13th. You're going to make sure you want to attend this webinar. We're talking about all of the features we released in the first half of 22. And if you don't receive our email alerts on when we have new product releases, you can always find them in TrackVia University, and you can find them at help.trackvia.com as well. Yeah, like I said, we'll be sending this recording out in the next 2 days, and take a look at our 5-minute survey. And again, thank you for calling in and participating today.